The man who sent 17,000 people to the guillotine was now lying in his own blood, his jaw shattered, teeth scattered across the floor, trying to scream but only producing wet, gurgling sounds. But this wasn't the worst part of Robespierre's final 24 hours. What happened next was so brutal, so twisted with irony, that even hardened revolutionaries, who had watched thousands die, turned away in horror. Because the architect of the terror was about to discover that the machine he built to consume others had been hungrily waiting for him all along, and it would feast on his agony with the same methodical precision he had used to destroy his enemies. July 27, 1794, 9 a.m. Maximilien Robespierre climbs to the rostrum of the National Convention for what he doesn't know will be his final speech. But something is wrong. The man who never showed weakness, who had sent thousands to their deaths with cold precision, is visibly trembling. His voice cracks like a broken teenager asking for mercy. His hands shake so violently he can barely hold his notes. The 800 deputies watching him realize they're witnessing something unprecedented. The master of terror is terrified. For 2 endless hours, he rambles about conspiracies and enemies, but he makes a fatal mistake. He refuses to name names. Every deputy in that chamber hears his own death sentence between the lines, because they all know how Robespierre's mind works. Anonymous accusations mean everyone is guilty until proven dead. The speech finally ends to scattered, nervous applause. On any normal day, the room would have erupted in terrified approval. Today, the silence cuts through the air like a blade finding flesh. Then something incredible happens. One by one, the deputies find their courage. These men who had cowered before Robespierre for months suddenly realize he's just as mortal as his victims. Tallien calls him a dictator. Barry, his own propaganda minister, accuses him of tyranny. The man who lived by accusations dies by them. By noon, the convention votes to arrest Robespierre and his inner circle. But here's where the story gets truly insane, because this is where Robespierre's 24-hour nightmare really begins. The Paris Commune, Robespierre's power base that controls the streets, refuses to accept the arrest. They dispatch armed men to rescue him from the Committee of General Security, turning central Paris into a battleground. But when they finally free him, they make a crucial error. They take him to the Hôtel de Ville, the city hall which becomes both fortress and trap. It's the most recognizable building in Paris, sitting exposed with no escape routes. They've just locked the most wanted man in France, inside the most obvious target in the city. Outside, the convention mobilizes thousands of troops with cannons, surrounding the building like hunters cornering a wounded animal. Inside that shabby office, surrounded by maybe 200 loyal guardsmen, Robespierre faces the most terrifying realization of his life. There's nowhere to run. Every French city has a guillotine with his name on it. Every mayor knows his face. Flight means a slow death instead of a swift one. His followers beg him to flee Paris. Boats wait on the Seine. Horses stand ready at the city gates. But the man who reshaped France stands paralyzed, while his world collapses around him. And then his military commander Henriot, the one man who might save him, arrives blindingly drunk at the worst possible moment. Watching their commander stagger around like a village fool, Robespierre supporters begin slipping away into the night like rats abandoning a sinking ship. By 8:30 p.m., the convention declares Robespierre an outlaw, an ancient legal mechanism that means instant death without trial. Anyone can kill him on sight. 15,000 livres reward, dead or alive. Paris becomes a hunting ground, and the former master of terror becomes the prey. Town criers shout the decree through every district while handbills plaster every corner. The man who used this same law to crush others now feels its teeth at his throat. As midnight approaches, the building empties section by section. Guards abandon their posts, clerks flee with their ledgers. Commune councillors slither out the side doors like cowards. Men who swore loyalty hours earlier now fear for their own lives. In a cramped committee room, 5 men who once controlled France wait for death. Robespierre writes his final letters with shaking hands, messages to his sister Charlotte, instructions for his dog Brown, mundane details from a man about to die. His brother Augustin paces like a caged animal. Saint just sits silent in a corner. Couthon prays in his wheelchair. Libaz cleans his pistol with the methodical care of a man preparing for his final act. The sound of gunfire erupts through the corridors as convention troops storm the building. Barricades of desks and chairs won't stop muskets, let alone cannons. The assault comes from 3 directions simultaneously, and the commune's defenders scatter after firing a few desperate rounds. This is when the real horror begins. Libaz puts a bullet through his head rather than face capture. Better to die than be taken alive. His body collapses onto a pile of papers, blood-soaking revolutionary proclamations and death warrants he had signed. Augustin Robespierre throws himself from a window, both legs snapping like dry branches, but he survives, screaming in agony. Couthon, the paralyzed deputy, is tumbled down the stairs like a broken doll, his wheelchair clattering behind him. Saint just surrenders without a fight, the cold intellectual finally accepting reality. And then there's Robespierre himself, sitting at a table with his head in his hands as the doors splinter open. Some say he tried to shoot himself, and the pistol misfired, shattering his jaw. Others claim a soldier's bullet did the damage. But the most likely truth is even more pathetic. Robespierre, who lived by words rather than weapons, had never properly handled a gun. When he pressed the pistol to his head, his inexperienced grip caused it to kick violently, sending the ball tearing through his lower jaw instead of his brain. The architect of the terror, the man who sent thousands to clean deaths, botched his own suicide and left himself alive but ruined. Blood pours from his mouth as he writhers on the floor, his jaw hanging loose, teeth scattered like dice across the marble. They carry him through Paris streets on a stretcher at 2 a.m., blood soaking through makeshift bandages. The man who drove France into revolution can barely breathe. Crowds gather in the dead of night to spit and curse. Stones fly from every direction. Citizens who hid in terror for months suddenly find courage in the darkness. People pour from their homes to witness the fall of the tyrant, and their hatred is a living thing that feeds on his agony. At 3:30 a.m., an army surgeon examines the wound in the Tuileries. The jaw is shattered in 3 places, several teeth are gone, the tongue is nearly severed, but the brain remains intact. Robespierre will live to see his execution, which is perhaps the cruelest mercy fate could provide. They haul him onto a table in the Committee of Public Safety, his own office, where he had signed death orders for months. The irony throbs in the air like an infected wound. This very room where he planned the expansion of the terror, where he marked names for death with his morning coffee, where he reviewed execution lists with the casual indifference of a clerk processing paperwork. His desk still holds his papers, his signature sits on dozens of death warrants, and now he's the condemned man awaiting execution on that same table. The surgeon works by candlelight, cleaning the wound with spirits, stitching the tongue, binding the jaw with strips torn from a tablecloth. Field medicine for a man who once dined off gilded plates while others starved. Paris wakes at 8 a.m. to absolute chaos. Crowds gather on every corner as news runs like gunpowder through the quarter. Robespierre has fallen. The leader of the terror is captured. People dance in the streets, sing forbidden songs, pull out hidden bottles of wine they've saved for this moment. Bakers open early, shopkeepers lift their shutters, citizens emerge from fear like moles blinking in sunlight. But the celebration feels fragile, brittle, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell and bring back the nightmare they've endured for so long. The trial that isn't really a trial begins at 10:30 a.m. Fouquier, Tinville, the public prosecutor who had sent thousands to death, now reviews the case against his former master. But outlawry means no defense, no witnesses, no appeal, only verification of identity and a sentence of death. The same legal machinery that condemned thousands now runs in reverse with mechanical precision. Robespierre cannot speak to defend himself, because his jaw is a ruin of broken bone and torn flesh. He tries to scratch notes with trembling hands, but Fouquier barely glances at them. Revolutionary justice moves with terrifying efficiency when the architect of the terror stands in the dock. At noon, the tumbrel arrives, the same wooden cart that carried Marie Antoinette and thousands of others to the scaffold. They load Robespierre like freight, because he cannot sit straight, cannot support his own weight. The executioner's assistant helps him up with professional courtesy, the strange gentleness that exists between men who deal in death. But Robespierre weighs less than expected. Months of strain and paranoia have hollowed him out from within. The terror consumed its maker long before the blade would claim him. The crowd gathering around the rote is the largest in years, perhaps 20,000 bodies packed into every available space. Everyone wants to see the fall of the man who terrorized them, and their bloodlust is a beautiful, terrible thing to witness. Women scream curses that would make sailors blush. Men wave bloody rags like battle flags. Children hurl garbage with the accurate aim of trained assassins. The procession creeps through Paris like a carnival of hate, and every voice rises in the same chorus: death to the tyrant, down with the dictator. This is the same crowd that once cheered his speeches, hung on his every word, treated him like a prophet of virtue. Now they want his blood more than they want bread. The cart wheels shriek over cobblestones, and every jolt sends fresh shocks of agony through his shattered jaw. Robespierre keeps his eyes closed, maybe unconscious from pain, maybe ashamed to face the fury he created. The procession rolls past Rue Saint-Honoré, his old lodgings where he lived for 4 years, wrote speeches, planned purges in a small room like any middle-class clerk. Someone hurls a pail of pig's blood at the windows, and red streaks trickle down like tears. His old landlord, Duplay the carpenter, peeks from behind a curtain. The man who once treated Robespierre like a son now hides like a criminal. Revolutionary friendship dies fast when the guillotine calls your name. At 20:30 p.m., they reach the Place de la Révolution, where the guillotine waits like a patient lover. This is the very machine Robespierre helped perfect, the device he used to reshape France through systematic terror. The crowd surges around the scaffold with an energy that's almost sexual in its intensity, 15 throats baying for blood, demanding the climax they've waited months to witness. They drag him up the steps. An executioner, Sanson, who had performed this ritual over 1,000 times, prepares for his most famous performance. But here's where the story reaches its peak of brutal irony. Sanson rips away the bandage holding Robespierre's jaw in place, and the sound that emerges is not human, it's the raw, tearing shriek of a dying animal, a noise so horrible it cuts through the roar of 15,000 bloodthirsty voices, and creates a moment of perfect, icy silence. For the first time in hours, maybe the first time in months, Robespierre's eyes are clear and focused. He sees the crowd, the blood-stained platform, the blade poised above his neck like fate made metal. Understanding floods his face, as the architect of the terror finally comprehends his position in the machine he built. The blade falls with the same mechanical precision he had demanded from his system of justice. Sanson lifts the head and Paris loses its collective mind with joy. Dancing erupts in the streets. Wine pours like water. Church bells ring for the first time since the terror began. Blood pools in the straw, the same straw that had drunk the lives of his victims for months. The guillotine claims its most famous meal, and the man who fed it daily now feeds it one final time. But the story doesn't end at the scaffold, because what they discovered in his apartment that evening shocked even hardened revolutionaries, who thought they had seen everything. While crowds celebrate past midnight, officials swarm Robespierre's residence to catalogue his belongings for state confiscation. What they find reveals the true depth of the horror that had been averted. First, they discover his famous green coat, hanging neatly in the wardrobe, the coat he wore for every major speech while Paris bled. People tear it to pieces for souvenirs, everyone wanting a scrap from the tyrant's garment. But deeper in his drawers, they find correspondence with provincial officials, reports from local representatives, a vast web of intelligence spanning all of France. The Incorruptible had kept eyes on every department, every district, every influential citizen. The terror had been watching everyone, always. Then they make the discovery that changes everything. A secret drawer built into his desk, invisible unless you know exactly where to press. Inside, documents that rewrite the final act, a list of 137 names written in Robespierre's precise handwriting, deputies marked for immediate arrest and execution. A purge scheduled for July 30th, just 3 days after his fall. So vast it would have eclipsed everything that came before. The list includes moderates who questioned the pace of the terror, his own allies who had helped steer the killing machine, even administrators and judges who had carried out his orders faithfully. France was prepared to devour itself from the head down, leaving nothing but Robespierre's personal dictatorship ruling over a wasteland of corpses. More papers reveal the full scope of the planned mega-purge. Military orders ready to sign, arrest warrants for 12 generals, instructions to provincial officials in code to prepare mass execution lists. If carried out, the French army would have awakened leaderless while foreign forces massed on the borders. Cities like Lyon, already brutally punished for revolt, faced total depopulation, buildings razed, survivors scattered, entire communities erased from the map. Revolutionary justice without restraint, vengeance written into policy, death as economic strategy, since each execution would confiscate more property to fund the bankrupt government. His private journal reveals the mind of a man walking the razor's edge between messianic conviction and complete madness. Daily entries from the last 6 months show paranoid ramblings about enemies and plots. Sleepless nights spent checking locks 3 times, constant fear of assassination. The preacher of virtue saw corruption everywhere, suspected everyone of hiding royalist sympathies. The July pages turned desperate with wild theories about deputy conspiracies and plans to denounce half the convention. The final entry, dated July 26, reads, "Tomorrow I will tell the truth that virtue may triumph or I will die." A man resolved to cleanse France with blood, or be swallowed by the system he created. Among his personal effects, investigators find architectural plans to expand the guillotine's operation, multiple execution sites across Paris, steam-driven blades for faster killing. Industrialized death at a scale the world had never imagined. The man who once preached virtue had prepared to mechanize terror itself, turning murder into an assembly line of systematic slaughter. Financial papers exposed the bankruptcy bleeding France dry through war abroad and repression at home, with Robespierre's solution being more confiscation from the condemned, funding government through legalized theft, making each execution serve economic policy. Personal letters cut deepest of all. His sister Charlotte pleading for the violence to stop, his brother Augustin writing of private doubts, voices within the circle of terror questioning the endless blood. But Robespierre grows more isolated and more resolved with each doubt expressed. If others falter, he alone will act. Virtue requires sacrifice. France must be purified in blood, no matter the cost in human lives or national survival. The final inventory shows his personal wealth at 873 livres, less than a skilled artisan earned in a year. The man who controlled France's treasury lived poorer than many of his victims, seeking power without profit, destruction without enrichment. The investigators finish at dawn on July 29th, sealing hundreds of documents that reveal how close France came to complete annihilation. The Republic had stepped back from the brink by pure accident, a misfired pistol, 20 minutes of combat, the sheer luck that prevented the final purge. Without those narrow margins, France would have descended into slaughter so complete it would have made the previous terror look like a practice session. The revolution would have burned itself alive, leaving nothing but ashes and foreign conquerors to divide the ruins. 3 days later, they unlock one final secret hidden in his desk, detailed plans showing that Robespierre had been preparing something even worse than mass execution. He had been designing a new form of government, where terror would be permanent, systematic, and total. Every citizen would be under constant surveillance, every conversation monitored, every thought policed. France would become a prison where the only escape was death, and even death would come only when the state decided it was politically useful. The architect of the terror had been building something that wouldn't just kill the body, but murder the very concept of human freedom. Looking back across the centuries, Robespierre's final 24 hours reveal the ultimate truth about power corrupted by ideology. The man who began as a sincere reformer, genuinely concerned about justice and virtue, had transformed into something more terrifying than any traditional tyrant. He had created a system where murder became virtue, where killing was not just permitted but morally required, where the very concept of mercy became treason against the state. His death ended not just a reign of terror, but a philosophy that would have consumed civilization itself, if allowed to reach its logical conclusion. The machine he built to purify France through blood had been hungrily waiting for its creator all along, and when it finally claimed him, it did so with the same methodical precision he had demanded from every other execution. Except this time, the architect of terror discovered that his own machine had been designed to feast on agony, and his broken jaw ensured that his final meal would be seasoned with the perfect ingredient. He had served to thousands of others the exquisite taste of helpless, screaming pain.